The first time I saw a human in person, I thought the stories were exaggerations. They didn't look particularly impressive. No natural armor, no claws, dull teeth, and skin that tears with alarming ease. Just another soft, warm-blooded species that evolved on a mid-sized planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. We'd encountered hundreds of similar species across our expansion through this arm of the galaxy. Ambassador Tkal, please follow me. The human delegation is waiting, said my aide, interrupting my thoughts as our ship docked with the neutral station where first contact negotiations were to take place. I straightened my ceremonial vestments, the weight of representing the entire Viridian conclave heavy on my shoulders. The council had chosen me for my diplomatic experience, but even I felt nervous. The intelligence reports on humans were concerning. Remember, I told my team as we prepared to disembark, show no signs of aggression or fear. They can detect both with uncanny accuracy. The human standing at the airlock entrance was smaller than I expected, female according to their binary classification, with dark hair pulled back tightly and sharp eyes that seemed to evaluate our entire delegation in seconds. Ambassador Tkal, welcome to Neutral Station Epsilon. I'm Captain Chin, head of security for the human delegation. She extended her hand, and I recalled the briefing on their customary greeting. I reached forward with my primary appendage and grasped hers gently. The direct physical contact made my scales ripple involuntarily. Thank you, Captain. We come in peace and with hopes for mutual understanding. She smiled, a gesture I'd studied but still found slightly unnerving, this baring of teeth that somehow signaled friendliness rather than threat. That's what we all want. Please follow me. As we walked the corridor, I noticed two more humans flanking us, moving with a fluid grace that belied their seemingly awkward bipedal structure. They wore simple dark uniforms, but my military advisor had quietly informed me that both were likely Special Forces operators. I pretended not to notice the weapons concealed beneath their jackets. The main conference room was neutral territory, designed to accommodate various physiologies and environmental needs. The human delegation stood as we entered. Their lead negotiator, an older male with silver-streaked hair, stepped forward. Ambassador Tkal, I'm Diplomatic Envoy Richardson. On behalf of the United Earth Alliance, welcome. The formalities proceeded smoothly, and soon we were seated around the large table, beginning the dance of interspecies diplomacy. I found Richardson articulate and reasonable, though difficult to read. Humans lacked the color-changing skin or scent markers that made most species' emotional states obvious to a trained diplomat. It was during our third session that the incident occurred. We were discussing potential trade routes when the station's alarms blared to life. Captain Chen's hand immediately went to her communicator. Sir, we have an unidentified vessel approaching. They're not responding to hails and are on intercept course. Before Richardson could respond, the station rocked violently. The lights flickered and emergency systems activated. Hostile action, Chen reported calmly, though I detected elevated stress in her voice. Unknown weapons signature. Station defenses are engaging. My heart's raced. This was exactly the scenario the Council had feared, trapped with humans during a crisis situation. I'd been thoroughly briefed on human psychology under threat, their notorious fight response, their ability to become hyper-focused killing machines when adrenaline flooded their systems, their pack-bonding tendencies that frequently led to self-sacrifice. Richardson stood. Ambassador Tkal, please remain here with your delegation. We'll secure the perimeter and establish what's happening. The humans moved with practiced efficiency, transforms before my eyes from polite diplomats to coordinated warriors. Captain Chin distributed weapons from a hidden compartment, and they established defensive positions at the room's entrance. Transmitting emergency codes now, one of the human aides reported. Response time from nearest UA vessel is 23 minutes. Another explosion rocked the station, closer this time. The artificial gravity fluctuated momentarily. That was the primary docking ring, Chin said, her face grim. They're boarding. My security chief growled low, a sound of fear. Who would attack during peace negotiations? This violates all interstellar conventions. The humans exchanged glances that I couldn't interpret. Ambassador, Richardson said quietly, approaching our side of the room, we have reason to believe this attack may be targeting your delegation specifically. My blood ran cold. The Krell? I asked, naming our species' ancient enemies. He nodded. Our intelligence suggested they might attempt to sabotage these talks. We didn't have confirmation until now. The implication was clear. The humans had withheld information. I felt anger rise but pushed it down. So we are trapped here. The station shuddered again. The lights went out completely before emergency systems bathed everything in dim red. Life support compromised in sections 3 through 7, an automated voice announced. Station breach detected. Richardson made a quick decision. We need to move to the emergency shelters. Captain, secure our route. Sir. Chin nodded, then turned to the other humans. Taylor, Singh, take point. Standard formation, non-lethal if possible, but priority is protecting both delegations. What happened next would change forever how I viewed humans. As we moved through the darkened corridors, we encountered the first of the boarders, Krell shock troops in full battle armor. Before my security team could even raise their weapons, the humans moved. It wasn't just their speed that astonished me. It was the controlled violence, the precision, the absolute lack of hesitation. 3 humans disabled 7 Krell warriors in seconds, using the attackers' greater size against them, exploiting weaknesses in their armor that I hadn't even known existed. One of the humans took a glancing blow that would have incapacitated most species. He continued fighting as though uninjured. When it was over, Captain Chin turned to me, breathing slightly elevated but otherwise calm. There was blood, her own, on her face. Are you all right, Ambassador? I couldn't speak for a moment. The intelligence reports hadn't exaggerated. If anything, they'd underestimated. Why? I finally managed. Why would you protect us this way? We have no alliance yet. No formal agreement. She looked genuinely confused by my question. You're unarmed diplomats under our protection. Why wouldn't we? Richardson approached, helping one of my injured aides. Ambassador, we need to keep moving. The emergency shuttle bay is 2 levels down. As we continued our desperate journey through the compromised station, watching the humans fight with terrifying efficiency to protect not just themselves but my delegation as well, I finally understood. This was why the Viridian intelligence briefings had one overwhelming conclusion about humanity. Under no circumstances were we to engage them in warfare. Not because we couldn't win, though that was uncertain, but because of what victory would cost. Because these strange, soft-skinned creatures without claws or armor had something more dangerous than any natural weapon. They had conviction. And when humans believed they were fighting for something worthy, like protecting others, they would never, ever stop. That was 5 cycles ago. Now, as I stand before the Viridian High Council delivering my final report on humanity, I can still vividly recall the acrid smell of burned circuitry and the sound of human boots on metal as they fought to get us all to safety. Ambassador Tkal, Elder Voss leaned forward, her ancient scales dull with age but eyes sharp with intelligence. Your written report contains several controversial recommendations regarding our approach to the humans. Many on this council find your position surprising, given your previous advocacy for cautious isolation. The chamber fell silent. 12 of the most powerful beings in our civilization waited for my response. I had been one of them once before accepting the diplomatic mission. Respectful elders, I understand your concerns. I straightened, feeling the old wound in my secondary limb, a reminder of our escape from the station. But I must emphasize that my recommendations are based on direct observation and experience. The humans are not what we initially believed. Elder Kresh, always the militarist, hissed softly. They are dangerous predators who develop spaceflight before outgrowing their violent tendencies. The intelligence reports are clear. The reports are incomplete, I countered. Yes, humans evolved as pursuit predators. Yes, their history contains violence that would make even a Krell warpriest flinch. But there is context we failed to consider. I activated the holo display, showing footage from our escape. The emergency shuttle bay had been overrun by Krell forces when we arrived. Captain Chin had assessed the situation in seconds. We need that shuttle, she had said, her voice calm despite the dire circumstances. Singh, how's our ammunition? Low, Captain. 3 charges each, maybe 4. Richardson, the diplomat, had stepped forward. We have 14 civilians to protect and at least 20 hostiles between us and extraction. Options. What happened next still astonished me. These humans, diplomats and security personnel, not dedicated warriors, had formulated a complex tactical plan in mere moments, communicating in truncated phrases and gestures that seemed almost telepathic in their efficiency. The council should note, I said, freeze-framing the footage, that at no point did the humans consider abandoning us to save themselves. In fact, they repeatedly placed themselves at greater risk to ensure our safety. I advanced the recording. The human named Taylor had taken a serious injury covering our retreat. 2 of my security team had moved to help him, but he waved them off. I'm still combat effective, he'd said through gritted teeth. Stay with your ambassador. But this only proves their predatory nature, Elder Kresh insisted. Their capacity for violence is matched by their capacity for sacrifice, I interrupted, breaking protocol. Elder, forgive me, but you misunderstand what makes humans truly formidable. I switched to different footage, quiet moments during our wait for rescue after we'd secured the emergency communication array. The humans had established a defensive perimeter, treated the wounded of both delegations and rationed supplies with absolute fairness. Captain Chin, I showed the human security leader applying medical treatment to one of my injured aides, had 3 broken ribs and internal bleeding at this point. She did not seek treatment until all others were stabilized. The council chamber remained silent as I continued. We have misunderstood humanity from the beginning. Yes, they evolved as predators, but as social predators who survived through cooperation. Their most remarkable trait isn't their violence, it's their ability to extend their protective instincts beyond their immediate group. Elder Voss tilted her head. You suggest they considered your delegation part of their pack? They did, I confirmed. Almost immediately. This is the key understanding missing from our intelligence assessments. Humans form bonds quickly, and once formed, those bonds trigger protective responses that override self-preservation. I showed the council the final moments of our ordeal, when a Krell commander had me at weapon point, demanding the humans surrender. Richardson had stepped forward, unarmed. Your quarrel is with Earth, Commander. Release the ambassador and we can discuss terms. The Krell had laughed. You have no leverage, human. Richardson's expression had changed then, subtly but completely. Later, I would learn that the humans call this the diplomat smile, an expression that contains no actual warmth. Actually, we do. While we've been talking, Earth Defense Force vessels have entered the system. Additionally, the commander of this station activated a quantum entanglement distress beacon the moment your ships were identified. The data package containing evidence of your unprovoked attack on a diplomatic mission has already reached every major government in the quadrant. The Krell commander had faltered, checking his communications only to find them jammed. You're bluffing. Richardson had maintained that terrifying smile. I'm a diplomat. I never bluff. I merely arrange circumstances favorable to peaceful resolutions. 2 minutes later, human special forces breached the compartment. The Krell never had a chance. Our rescue was not luck, I told the council. It was the result of careful human contingency planning. They anticipated the attack, prepared accordingly, and executed a response that minimized casualties on all sides. Elder Kresh still looked unconvinced. So we should ally with these humans because they are effective warriors? No, Elder. We should ally with them because they fight only when necessary, and with precision rather than rage. Because they extend protection to those they consider under their care. Because, despite their capacity for violence, they consistently choose restraint. I closed the holo display and faced the council directly. 87 species have attempted to conquer or control humanity since they achieved spaceflight. Each has failed, often catastrophically. But not a single human world has ever been permanently occupied by an enemy force. Not because humans cannot be defeated in battle, they can, but because they never stop resisting. Elder Voss leaned forward. And yet you recommend alliance rather than cautious isolation. Why? Because, I said simply, the Krell didn't attack the station to disrupt our negotiations. They attacked because they fear what's coming. The long-range astronomical data is clear. The void current carrying the swarm will reach inhabited space within 20 cycles. A ripple of discomfort passed through the council. The swarm, a mindless, consuming force that had destroyed 3 civilizations in recorded history. The Krell believe they can survive by sacrificing buffer worlds, including human colonies, I continued. They know that if we ally with humanity, such a strategy becomes impossible. I projected a final image, not from our ordeal, but from human historical archives. A simple photograph of human rescue workers pulling survivors from a collapsed structure after some ancient disaster. We should ally with humanity not because we fear them, but because when the darkness comes, you want these people standing beside you. Not because they are fearless, they feel fear as we do, but because they act despite it. Because in their entire history, they have never abandoned allies to face a threat alone. The council chamber fell silent again, but I could see the shift in postures, the subtle changes in skin tone that indicated deep thought. I had given them much to consider. Elder Voss finally spoke. Your report requires further discussion, Ambassador Tkal. But I believe we must reconsider our approach to humanity. As I left the chamber, my aide fell into step beside me. Do you think they'll approve the alliance? She asked quietly. I looked down at the data crystal in my hand, containing one final piece of evidence I hadn't shared with the council. The personal message Captain Chen had sent me after our return. For their sake, I replied, I hope so. The Viridian Human Alliance was barely 3 standard cycles old when the swarm arrived at the edge of the Trillian sector, a full 7 cycles ahead of our most pessimistic projections. I remember the day the alert came through. I was overseeing the construction of the joint defense platform in orbit around Haven, our outermost colony world. Ambassador Tkal, my aide's voice trembled slightly as she handed me the secure data tablet. Priority transmission from High Command. I read it twice, the sensation of my scales tightening with dread almost overwhelming. The swarm had consumed the uninhabited Rylek system in mere days. The automated beacons had transmitted horrifying footage before being devoured, the characteristic black void ships moving like a plague of insects, stripping planets to their cores. Send word to Earth Central Command, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Tell them it's begun. Within hours, Captain Chin, now Fleet Commander Chin, arrived through the Quantum Gate, her ship the first of what would become an armada. She hadn't changed much in the years since our first meeting, perhaps a few more lines around her eyes, her hair now cut military short. The same focused intensity remained. Ambassador, she greeted me with the human handclasp that had become familiar. Looks like your warning bought us less time than we hoped. 7 cycles less, I confirmed grimly. The void currents must have accelerated beyond our models. She nodded, immediately shifting to operational matters. We've activated the Bulwark Protocol. Every civilian ship with FTL capability is being requisitioned for evacuation duties. Earth has authorized full deployment of the fleet. I felt a chill. The Council hasn't yet voted on full military commitment. Chen's expression hardened slightly. With respect, Ambassador, your Council needs to decide quickly. The swarm doesn't negotiate or take prisoners. Either we face this together or we all die separately. The next 12 standard days became a blur of emergency meetings, evacuation orders, and military preparations. The Viridian Council finally authorized full deployment, but precious time had been lost to debate. Meanwhile, the humans moved with alarming speed and coordination. I found myself in the Haven Orbital Command Center, watching as the tactical display tracked the swarm's advance. The combined Viridian human fleet was assembling, but it would be the largest military operation in either of our species' histories. Over 2,000 ships, nearly half of them human. Richardson, now Ambassador Richardson, stood beside me at the tactical display. Age had whitened his hair completely, but his eyes remained sharp. The evacuation of the border worlds is at 78%, he said quietly. We won't get everyone out in time. How can your people remain so calm? I asked, watching human officers coordinating the defense with mechanical efficiency. This could be the end of everything. Richardson's smile was grim. This isn't humanity's first extinction-level threat, Ambassador. We've faced our own extinction at least a dozen times in our history. It clarifies priorities. A young human officer approached us, saluting. Ambassador Richardson, Ambassador Tkal, Fleet Commander Chen requests your presence in the strategy room. The Krell envoy has arrived. I blinked in surprise. The Krell? Here? Richardson's expression revealed nothing. I may have extended an invitation. The strategy room was tense when we entered. Chen stood across the table from Warpriest Kvak, the highest military authority in the Krell hegemony. The history between our species made this meeting almost unthinkable, yet here we were. The swarm doesn't discriminate between victims, Chen was saying, her voice level but intense. Your border worlds will fall just like ours if we don't coordinate. Kvak's serpentine head swayed slightly, pupils contracted to slits. The hegemony has survived for 10,000 cycles by looking to its own interests first. And where did that philosophy get you during the Meridian collapse? Chen countered. 3 of your colony worlds lost because you refused coalition support. The Warpriest hissed, claws extending involuntarily. I tensed, but Chen didn't flinch. You've reviewed our tactical projections, she continued, activating a holographic display of the sector. Even with your forces added to the coalition, our models give us only a 67% chance of containing the swarm. Without you. She let the implication hang. Kvak looked at the display, then at me. The Viridian Conclave now takes tactical advice from humans? How the mighty have fallen. Before I could respond, Richardson stepped forward. Warpriest, may I speak plainly? The Krell nodded curtly. Humanity remembers the attack on Epsilon Station, Richardson said quietly. We remember the colonies you raided during the border disputes. We have not forgotten or forgiven these things. The room grew dangerously still. Even Chin looked concerned at this approach. However, Richardson continued, we're offering you something your kind rarely extends to others, a second chance. Not because we've grown soft, but because extinction is on our doorstep, and old hatreds are a luxury none of us can afford. For the first time I saw uncertainty in a Krell war priest's posture. How do we know you won't abandon the hegemony worlds once your colonies are secure? Vac asked. Chin tapped the display, expanding the tactical overlay. Because of this. Operation Firebreak. The hologram shifted to show a complex battle plan unlike anything I'd seen before. Human ships positioned at key points in seemingly vulnerable formations. You're creating deliberate weak points, Kvak observed, professional interest overriding hostility. Channeling the swarm into kill zones. Yes, Chin confirmed. But for this to work we need your forces here, here, and here. She indicated 3 critical junctures. Without the Krell fleet the containment fails. We all fall. Together we have a fighting chance. Kvak studied the plan with the calculating focus of a born predator. And the evacuation priority? Equal, Richardson said firmly. Every world gets the same proportional resources based on population. Human, Viridian, Krell, it doesn't matter. We save as many as we can. The alert klaxon cut through the tension. A communications officer burst into the room. Fleet Commander. The swarm has accelerated again. They've broken through the automated defense line at Proxima Vale. Estimated arrival at Haven System in 72 hours. The color drained from human faces around the room, their version of the scale-tightening fear response my own kind experiences. 72 hours. Not even enough time to complete the evacuation of Haven itself. Chin recovered first. Move the timeline forward. All ships combat ready in 24 hours. Civilian evacuation gets priority on the jump gates. Impossible, one of her officers said. We need at least 48 hours to position the fleet. Then we work twice as fast, Chin snapped. Ambassador Richardson, we need the Krell answer now. All eyes turned to the war priest. For a moment that felt eternal, Kvak remained silent, calculating. Then he straightened to his full height, towering over even the tallest human. The Krell hegemony will join your coalition, he said finally. But know this, human, if this is some elaborate trap, our final act will be to ensure none of your species survives either. Richardson didn't blink. Understood, war priest. Commander Chin will coordinate with your fleet. As the room erupted into activity, I felt a cold certainty settle in my hearts. The moment the ancient text spoke of had arrived 3 species that had once tried to exterminate each other, now making a desperate final stand together. Chin caught my eye across the chaos of the command center, her expression grim but determined. She nodded once, a human gesture I'd come to recognize as acknowledgement between equals facing impossible odds. The next 72 hours would determine the fate of all our civilizations. And as I watched the humans prepare for battle, not with bloodlust or glory-seeking, but with the somber efficiency of those who understand the true cost of war, I finally understood the most important lesson about humanity. They never fight unless they must. But when they must fight, the galaxy itself holds its breath. 48 hours before the swarm's estimated arrival, I received an urgent summons to the secure communications hub deep within Haven's military complex. The message had come directly from the Viridian High Council, Priority Alpha, for my eyes only. As I made my way through corridors packed with military personnel of 3 species working with grim determination, I couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. The communications officer, a young Viridian who looked like she hadn't rested in days, ushered me into the private booth and sealed the door. Ambassador, the council is standing by. This is a direct quantum link, completely secure. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing Elder Voss. She looked older than when I'd last seen her, the crisis aging us all before our time. Ambassador Tkal, she began without preamble, what I am about to share is known only to the inner council. We've detected an anomaly in the swarm's movement patterns. A tactical display appeared beside her image, showing the wave-like advance of the Black Void ships. Our deep space sensors have detected a directional bias in their approach vector, she continued. The swarm isn't spreading randomly. It's being guided. I felt my primary heart skip a beat. Guided? The swarm is a mindless consuming force. That's what all historical records indicate. So we believed. Elder Voss's scales had taken on the dull gray of extreme stress. But our analysts have identified a pattern. The swarm is avoiding certain systems while accelerating toward others. Specifically, it's targeting systems with joint Viridian human settlements and bypassing uninhabited systems that would be easier to consume. The implication stunned me. You're suggesting intelligence. Purpose. We're suggesting worse, she replied. We believe the swarm may be a weapon. The room seemed to spin around me. A weapon. The horror of it, a force capable of stripping entire worlds, pointed deliberately at populated systems. Who would possess such technology? Who could control such a thing? Elder Voss's expression grew even grimmer. That's why I've contacted you directly. We've triangulated a series of quantum frequency pulses that correlate with each directional change of the swarm. The source is within the Haven system. Ice ran through my veins. You believe the controlling signal is coming from here? From Haven itself. Or somewhere in close proximity. Ambassador, you must take this information to only the highest levels of human command. If there is a traitor or infiltrator among the coalition forces. She didn't need to finish the thought. If someone within our defense perimeter was controlling the swarm, we were already doomed. I understand, I said, my mind racing through the implications. I'll speak with Fleet Commander Chin immediately. Be careful whom you trust, Tkal, Elder Voss warned before the transmission ended. Even old allies. I found Chin in the main tactical center, deep in discussion with Kvak and the other battle group commanders. The massive holographic display showed our combined fleet, now nearly complete, positioned according to Operation Firebreak specifications. When she saw my expression, she immediately stepped away from the group. Ambassador? What's happened? I hesitated, Elder Voss's warning echoing in my mind. But if I couldn't trust Chin after all we'd been through, then there was truly no hope. Secure room, I said quietly. Just you and Richardson. 10 minutes later, the three of us stood in Chen's private command office, sealed against all surveillance. I relayed the council's findings, watching their expressions carefully. Richardson absorbed the information with the practiced neutrality of a career diplomat, but Chen's reaction was visceral, a flash of shock followed by cold fury. You're telling me someone's controlling this thing? That billions of lives have been lost to what amounts to a directed weapon. Her voice was dangerously quiet. The evidence suggests it, I confirmed. And the controlling signal appears to be coming from within this system. Richardson paced the small room. That significantly changes our strategic position. If we can locate and neutralize the control signal, the swarm might become directionless, Chin finished. Maybe even dormant. Hope, dangerous, fragile hope, bloomed for the first time since the crisis began. But it was immediately tempered by the more troubling question. Who among us would want to destroy both our civilizations? I asked. The Krell were our most likely adversaries, but they stand to lose as much as we do. Chen's eyes narrowed. Unless their involvement in the coalition is a cover. A way to ensure they have ships in position when the swarm arrives. That doesn't track with the targeting pattern, Richardson pointed out. The swarm has already consumed 3 Krell border worlds. If they're controlling it, why sacrifice their own people? An alarm chimed softly on Chen's comm unit. The fleet coordination meeting. We need to go back or our absence will be noticed. What do we do with this information? I asked. Chen's expression hardened into the battle-ready mask I remembered from our first meeting years ago. We find the source of the signal without alerting whoever's sending it. I'll assign my most trusted people to modify some of our sensor drones for close-range quantum pulse detection. And if we find it? Richardson asked. Then we eliminate it, Chen said simply. Ambassador Tkal, can you ensure the Viridian ships closest to Haven are commanded by captains you personally trust? I nodded. It can be arranged. Good. Because if this goes sideways, we may need to act without consensus from the full coalition. As we prepared to return to the tactical center, Richardson placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of human solidarity I'd come to appreciate. Ambassador, there's something else to consider, he said quietly. If the swarm is artificial, a weapon rather than a natural phenomenon, then its capabilities may be more limited than we feared. I hadn't considered that angle. You believe it may be weaker than it appears? I believe, Richardson said carefully, that any weapon can be defeated once you understand how it works. When we returned to the tactical center, everything looked the same, species that had once been enemies working together against a common threat. But now, looking at each face, I couldn't help wondering, who among them might be orchestrating our destruction? The next 12 hours passed in a blur of preparation and hidden investigations. Chen's trusted officers modified survey drones and launched them with false mission parameters. I rearranged Viridian ship assignments without explanation, calling in personal favors from captains who had served with me before my diplomatic appointment. It was a young human lieutenant who finally brought us the critical data, slipping a data crystal to Chen during a routine briefing. The three of us met again in the secure room. The signal isn't coming from Haven, Chen said without preamble, activating a holographic display. It's coming from the seventh moon of the gas giant on the system's edge. The display showed a barren, cratered moon, uninhabited and unremarkable. There's nothing there, I said confused. No installations, no outposts. Nothing official, Richardson agreed. But look at this. The image zoomed in to show a small anomaly, barely visible against the gray landscape. A structure of some kind, built into the shadow of a crater wall. Energy signatures are minimal, Chen explained. It's been designed to appear dormant, but the quantum pulse transmissions are unmistakable. They precisely match the pattern your council identified. I studied the image trying to make sense of it. Who built this? When? That's the most disturbing part, Richardson said grimly. Based on dust accumulation patterns and radiation scoring, our analysts estimate it's been there for at least 300 years. The implication hit me like a physical blow. 300 years ago, none of our species had achieved interstellar travel. The structure predated all of us. Someone has been planning this for centuries, I whispered. Waiting for the right moment. Chen's expression was stone. 30 hours until the swarm arrives. Whatever we're going to do, it needs to happen now. A strike team, Richardson suggested. Small, elite, completely off the books. In the middle of fleet preparations? I asked. How would we explain the absence of key personnel? Chen's gaze was steady. We don't. I'll lead the team myself. The fleet can function without me for 12 hours. That's suicide, Richardson objected. We need you here commanding the defense. And we need that signal stopped, Chen countered. Otherwise there won't be anything left to defend. As they argued logistics, a terrible realization began forming in my mind. 300 years. A structure designed to remain hidden until activated. The precise targeting of joint colonies. Wait, I interrupted. What if this isn't about destroying us? What if it's about forcing us together? They both turned to me, confusion evident. Think about it, I continued, the pieces falling into place. The timing of the swarm's appearance, just after our alliance was formalized. The targeting pattern driving us toward cooperation. Even the accelerated timeline forcing us to work together more closely than we otherwise might have. Richardson's eyes widened slightly. You think someone engineered this crisis to force an alliance? Who would sacrifice billions of lives for such a goal? Chen demanded. I had no answer. But as the three of us stared at the ancient structure on that distant moon, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were puppets in a game whose rules we didn't understand. A game that had been in motion since before any of us were born. Prepare your strike team, Commander, I said quietly. I'm coming with you. Our approach to the seventh moon was nerve-wracking in its simplicity. While the combined fleet prepared for the swarm's arrival, Commander Chin, myself, and a small team of specialists departed Haven in an unmarked transport shuttle, officially on a final inspection of the early warning buoys at the system's edge. No one questioned the mission. Chen's authority was absolute in these final hours. The team consisted of just 6. Chen and myself, 2 human special operations soldiers named Reeves and Powell, a Viridian tech specialist named Sareth, and, most surprisingly, a war priest Kvak of the Krell. You're certain we can trust him? I asked Chen quietly as our shuttle approached the desolate moon. She checked her weapon one final time, her movements precise and economical. Absolutely not. But if this affects all our species, all should be represented. Besides, I'd rather have him where I can see him. Kvak, with his enhanced hearing, merely hissed softly from across the cabin, neither confirming nor denying Chen's suspicion. The structure was more imposing up close. Built into the shadow of a massive crater, it resembled no architectural style I recognized, all smooth curves and angles that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. No obvious entrance presented itself. Passive scans only, Chen ordered as Sareth deployed his equipment. If someone's monitoring this place, we don't want to announce ourselves. Energy signature is constant, Sareth reported, his scales shifting nervously. Quantum pulse emissions continuing at 12-minute intervals. Structure extends at least 200 meters beneath the surface. How do we get in? Reeves asked, the human soldier scanning the perimeter through specialized optics. Kvak moved forward, his serpentine body flowing across the lunar dust in a way that reminded me why the Krell were such feared warriors. The ancients built according to principles of flow, he said, studying the structure. Energy, like water, follows the path of least resistance. His clawed hand reached out, tracing a pattern in the air above the surface. Here. This is where we enter. Powell, the demolitions expert, stepped forward with a device I didn't recognize. Shaped molecular disruptor, Chin explained, seeing my confusion. Breaks the bonds between atoms without an explosion. Quieter than blasting. Convenient, Kvak remarked dryly. One wonders what other technologies humans have developed while preaching peace. Before Chin could respond, the device activated, creating a perfect circular opening in the structure's surface. Cool air rushed out, the building had atmosphere. Masks on, Chin ordered. We don't know what's been trapped in there for 3 centuries. The interior was even stranger than the exterior. Corridors that curved in ways that seemed to defy conventional geometry, surfaces marked with symbols that resembled no language I'd ever encountered. Lights activated automatically as we moved deeper, responding to our presence. It's leading us, Sareth whispered, his tech scanner flickering with readings. The energy flow is directing our path. Trap? Reeves asked tersely, weapon ready. Unknown, Sareth replied. But the quantum pulse originates from the central chamber, approximately 100 meters ahead. We moved cautiously forward, the corridor gradually widening until it opened into a vast spherical chamber. In the center, suspended in what appeared to be a field of shimmering energy, was a crystalline structure, pulsing with blue-white light in precise 12-minute intervals. That's our transmitter, Chin said, her voice hushed despite herself. Sareth, can you determine how to deactivate it? The tech specialist moved forward, scanning the crystal from a safe distance. The technology is beyond me, Commander. I don't recognize any of these energy patterns. Kvak circled the chamber, examining the walls, which were covered in the same indecipherable markings. This is old. Far older than 300 years. This facility was built by someone who came before any of our civilizations. What matters is shutting it down, Chin said firmly. Powell, options? The demolitions expert studied the crystal. I could try to disrupt the containment field, but without knowing how it works. He shook his head. Could trigger a massive energy release. Kill us all. We have 18 hours before the swarm reaches Haven, Chin reminded us. We need to make a decision. As they debated options, I found myself drawn to a section of wall apart from the others. The markings here were different, less angular, more fluid. Something about them seemed almost familiar. These are mathematical sequences, I realized suddenly. Universal constants. Pi, the golden ratio, gravitational constants. A primer, Richardson's voice came through our comms suddenly. He was monitoring from Haven. Like the ones humanity included on the Voyager probes. Meant to establish communication with intelligent life. So how do we communicate back? Chin asked, joining me at the wall. Before I could respond, Kvak moved with shocking speed. He lunged toward the crystal, one clawed hand extending for the control panel we'd identified at its base. No! Chin shouted, but it was too late. Kvak's claw touched the panel, and the entire chamber transformed. The walls became transparent, revealing a vast space beyond filled with swirling galaxies and stars, a perfect holographic representation of our sector of space. And the crystal. The crystal expanded its projection, filling the chamber with light that coalesced into a humanoid form. Evaluation protocol activated, said a voice that somehow spoke all our languages simultaneously. Assessment of cooperative potential, in progress. We stood frozen as the light being studied us. 3 distinct species present, it noted. Physiological analysis confirms genetic divergence exceeding standard parameters for cooperative behavior. What are you? Chin demanded, her weapon still trained on Kvak. The being turned to her. I am the Arbiter. The final safeguard against what you call the swarm. You control the swarm, I said, understanding dawning. You've been directing it toward our worlds. I direct the cleanser, yes, the being acknowledged. It is a tool of last resort, deployed only when species fail to achieve cooperative harmony despite biological capacity to do so. The implications were staggering. You've been testing us, Chin said, lowering her weapon. Forcing us to work together against a common threat. Many species achieve space travel, the Arbiter explained dispassionately. Few achieve the empathy necessary to coexist peacefully. Those that cannot are deemed hazardous to galactic stability and are reset. Reset. Vac hissed. You mean exterminated. The building materials are reclaimed, the Arbiter corrected. Nothing is wasted. New species eventually evolve, and the evaluation begins again. Horror washed over me. How many civilizations have you reset? In this sector? 873 over approximately 12 million years. The chamber fell silent as we absorbed this. 12 million years of calculated extinction events, all in the name of some cosmic test of cooperation. Stop the swarm, Chin said finally, her voice leveled despite the situation. Our species are working together. We've formed alliances, mutual defense pacts. We've proven we can cooperate. The Arbiter seemed to consider this. Preliminary evidence is promising but insufficient. True cooperation must emerge naturally, not under duress. The test must continue to completion. Completion? I asked, dreading the answer. The cleanser will continue until it reaches a designated threshold world. If defensive operations demonstrate genuine sacrifice and cooperation across species lines, the test will be considered passed. And this threshold world is? Chin pressed. The planet you call Earth. The shock on Chen's face was palpable. Earth, humanity's homeworld, with its billions of inhabitants, its ancient history, its irreplaceable biodiversity. You've rigged this from the start, Chin said, anger finally breaking through her professional demeanor. You're herding the swarm toward Earth deliberately, forcing us to make impossible choices. The most meaningful tests require genuine stakes, the Arbiter replied simply. I stepped forward, an idea forming. Your function is to evaluate cooperation between species, correct? To determine if we can overcome our biological differences to work together. That is my primary directive. Then observe this, I said and turned to Chin. Commander, your Earth is the primary target. You could recall your fleet now, consolidate your forces to defend your homeworld specifically. It would give Earth the highest probability of survival. Chin stared at me, understanding my intent. And abandon our allies? Leave Viridian and Krell worlds undefended? It would be the logical choice from a purely human-centric perspective, I pressed. The maximum preservation of your own species. For a long moment, Chin was silent, studying my face. Then she turned to the Arbiter. No, she said firmly. We stand together. The defense plan remains as established, equal protection for all coalition worlds based on strategic positioning, not species origin. To my surprise, Kvak moved to stand beside her. The Krell hegemony concurs. The coalition defense holds. I joined them, forming a triangle before the light being. 3 species, 1 decision. Is that not the cooperation you seek to evaluate? The Arbiter seemed to pulse brighter. Interesting. Decision made without coercion, contrary to biological self-interest, demonstrating trust despite historical enmity. So call off your test, Chin demanded. Stop the swarm now. I cannot. The protocol must complete. But, the being seemed to hesitate, I can provide data that may increase your probability of success. A stream of information suddenly flooded our communication devices, technical specifications of the swarm's composition, movement patterns, and most importantly, structural weaknesses. The cleanser has safeguards, the Arbiter explained. Limitations to prevent unintended consequences. With this knowledge, your defensive plan has a 92.7% probability of success. Why help us now? Vac demanded. The light being's form shifted slightly. In 12 million years, this is the first time representatives of 3 distinct predator species have stood united without coercion when faced with self-sacrifice. It warrants observation rather than reset. The crystal pulsed once more and the Arbiter began to fade. The evaluation continues, but the parameters have been adjusted. Succeed in your defense and all testing in this sector will cease for 10,000 years. As the being disappeared, the crystal's pulsing changed rhythm. The controlling signal to the swarm had been modified. We need to get back to Haven, Chin said urgently, already moving toward the exit. With this data, we can reconfigure the defensive line. As we rushed back to our shuttle, I found myself beside Chin. You never hesitated, I observed. Not even when Earth was threatened directly. She checked her weapon with practiced efficiency. Humanity learned something important in our history, Ambassador. United we stand, divided we fall. It's not just a saying, it's evolutionary truth. Species that can't cooperate ultimately don't survive. 16 hours later, I stood on the command deck of Haven's defense platform, watching as the combined fleet engaged the swarm at precisely the coordinates indicated in the Arbiter's data. The void ships, now stripped of their mysterious controller's guidance, moved with less coordination, falling into the trap laid by our forces. The battle was still desperate, still costly, but no longer hopeless. Ship after ship from all three species executed the modified plan with precision and courage, sacrificing themselves when necessary to maintain the defensive line. When the last of the swarm vessels had been neutralized, silence fell across the command center. Then a Krell tactical officer spoke what we were all thinking. We won. As celebrations erupted around us, Richardson approached, his expression thoughtful. The Arbiter said this sector would be free from testing for 10,000 years. What happens after that? Chin smiled grimly. In 10,000 years, if our descendants face the same test, I hope they remember what we learned here. And what's that? I asked. She looked out at the view screen where the combined fleet, human, Viridian, and Krell, was returning home, battered but victorious. That the most dangerous species in the universe aren't those with the sharpest claws or the deadliest weapons, she said. They're the ones who understand that true strength comes from standing together. Kvak, overhearing, made the rasping sound that passed for Krell laughter. Is that why we never fight the humans, Ambassador Tkal? Not because they're too dangerous, but because they're too cooperative. I considered this as I watched Chin coordinating the relief efforts, already thinking ahead to rebuilding what had been lost. We never fight the humans, I said finally, because they remind us of what we can become when we're at our best. And that War Priest is the most formidable force in the universe. 2 cycles passed before life in our sector began to resemble normalcy again. The scars of the swarm's passage would take generations to heal, entire worlds stripped of resources, billions of lives lost across all 3 civilizations. But amid the devastation, something unprecedented had emerged. Genuine cooperation between species that had once been mortal enemies. I stood at the viewport of the newly constructed Unity Station, watching shuttles from Earth, Viridian Prime, and the Krell homeworld of Skith dock for the official signing of the Trilateral Defense and Restoration Accord. The station itself was a marvel of combined engineering, Krell structural principles, Viridian environmental systems, and human adaptive technology working in harmony. Admiring the view, Ambassador? Richardson asked, joining me at the viewport. Age had caught up with him during the recovery efforts. His movements were slower now, his once silver hair turned completely white. Admiring what it represents, I replied. 3 cycles ago, this would have been unthinkable. He smiled, the expression no longer seeming alien to me. Nothing like an ancient cosmic entity trying to exterminate you to bring people together. We shared a moment of grim amusement. The full truth about the Arbiter and its test remained classified at the highest levels of all 3 governments. The public narrative spoke only of an unexplained natural phenomenon that had been overcome through unprecedented cooperation. I read your final report to the Viridian Council, Richardson said after a moment. Your recommendations for permanently integrated defense systems are quite progressive. Not everyone will support such measures. Not everyone watched 3 species set aside millennia of conflict to save each other, I countered. The old divisions seem arbitrary now. Speaking of progressive measures, Richardson gestured toward the approaching group, Commander Chin, now Admiral Chin, walking alongside Warpriest Kvak and Elder Voss. An unlikely trio if ever there was one. The ceremony begins in 20 minutes, Chin announced as they joined us. The media representatives from all worlds are already assembled. Kvak made a dismissive gesture with his primary claws. Such pageantry. In the old days, alliances were sealed with blood oaths, not speeches and treaty documents. Yet here you are, War Priest, Elder Voss observed dryly, prepared to make a speech about peace and cooperation. The universe is full of surprises. The old Krell warrior hissed in what I now recognized as amusement. Indeed. If you had told me 2 cycles ago that I would stand beside humans and Viridians as allies, I would have questioned your sanity. Life has a way of challenging our most deeply held assumptions, Chin said. There was new gravity to her bearing. The weight of command during the crisis had left its mark, though she carried it with the same quiet strength I'd first observed years ago on Epsilon Station. A junior aide approached, bowing respectfully to each of us in turn. Pardon the interruption, but we've received an unusual transmission from the observatory at Proxima Vale. Admiral Chin, Ambassador Tkal, it's marked for your eyes only. Chin and I exchanged glances. The aide handed us a secure data tablet, then withdrew discreetly. The message was brief but chilling. Anomalous energy signature detected at lunar facility. Pattern matches arbiter transmission. Request instructions. It's watching us, Chin said quietly. Evaluating, I agreed. The 10,000-year reprieve doesn't mean the test is over. Should we be concerned? She asked. I considered this. I think it's curious. We did something unprecedented. We passed its test but not in the way it expected. Now it wants to see what happens next. Then let's give it something worth watching, Chin said with determination. The signing ceremony proceeded as planned, representatives of all three species officially committing to mutual defense, resource sharing and cooperative rebuilding efforts. I watched the faces of those present, noting the mix of hope and lingering wariness. Trust between former enemies wouldn't happen overnight, but the foundation had been laid. As formal proceedings concluded, I found myself approached by a young human officer I didn't recognize. Ambassador Tkal, she greeted me, offering the traditional Viridian salute with surprising accuracy. Lieutenant Harper, Earth Intelligence Service. Admiral Chin suggested I speak with you regarding a special assignment. Oh. I studied her carefully. There was something familiar in her bearing, the same quiet confidence I'd observed in Chin years ago. We're forming a new division, she explained. A joint task force to monitor for any signs of arbiter activity across all our territories. Given your first-hand experience, your insight would be invaluable. Understanding dawned. You want me to help prepare for the next test. 10,000 years is a long time by our standards, she acknowledged, but for a being that's existed for millions of years? Is barely a moment. We need to be ready. I found myself unexpectedly moved by the foresight this represented. Humans, with their comparatively brief lifespans, planning for a threat that would materialize long after everyone currently alive had turned to dust. I would be honored, I told her. Later that evening, a small private reception brought together those who knew the full truth about the swarm. Chin, Richardson, Kvak, Elder Voss, myself, and a handful of others who had been directly involved in the final battle. A toast, Chin proposed, raising a glass. To unlikely allies. To survival, Kvak added. To cooperation, Elder Voss suggested. Richardson smiled. To the next 10,000 years. As glasses clinked, I reflected on how far we had all come. The Viridian Council's original intelligence assessment about humanity seemed almost laughable now, not because it was wrong, but because it had missed the most important point entirely. Yes, humans were dangerous when threatened. Yes, they fought with a determination that bordered on the fanatical when protecting what they valued. But their true power, the quality that had ultimately saved all our civilizations, was their capacity to see beyond differences, to extend the concept of us, to include those who were fundamentally unlike themselves. 6 cycles later, I stood in the Great Hall of Records on Viridian Prime, finalizing the details of my memoirs. As Ambassador Emeritus, I'd been granted special permission to include certain classified details, though the full truth about the Arbiter would remain known only to those with the highest clearances. My aide, a young Viridian who had never known a world where humans were considered potential enemies, brought me the final draft for review. Ambassador, I've included the updated statistics on the joint colony projects as you requested, she said. 17 new worlds successfully established with mixed populations from all 3 species. Excellent, I told her, scanning the document. And the educational exchange numbers? Up 12% from last cycle. The human universities now host over 3,000 Viridian students, and nearly 2,000 Krell. I nodded with satisfaction. Each small connection between our species strengthened the foundation we had built together. As I prepared to sign off on the final version, my secure communication unit chimed, a priority message from Earth. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the screen, older now but still commanding. Ambassador, she greeted me. I hope I'm not interrupting your retirement. Hardly retirement, I corrected her. Just a different kind of service. What can I do for you, Admiral? We've been analyzing the data from the lunar facility, she said, her expression serious. There's something I think you should see. She transmitted a file, complex mathematical equations and symbols that looked familiar. This was embedded in the Arbiter's final transmission, Chin explained. Our linguists and mathematicians have been working on it for years. We've finally decoded it. And? I prompted, curiosity piqued. It's a set of coordinates, she said. Deep space beyond our current exploration range. And something else, what appears to be a timetable. I studied the information, the implications slowly dawning. The Arbiter is giving us a deadline. Chin nodded grimly. We believe so. The coordinates point to a region where several void currents intersect. If our calculations are correct, something is going to happen there in approximately 8,000 years. The next test, I murmured. Or something worse, Chin agreed. We're establishing a long-term monitoring program. Each generation will need to continue the work, keep building on what we learn. I felt a strange mix of dread and hope. 8,000 years should be sufficient time to prepare, if we continue on our current path. That's why I'm contacting you, Chin said. Your memoirs, your historical account, it needs to serve as more than just a record. It needs to be a warning and a guide for future generations. I understood immediately. Long after we were gone, our descendants would need to remember the lessons we had learned. The importance of cooperation, the strength found in unity, the dangers of isolation and conflict. I'll make the necessary adjustments, I promised. When the communication ended, I sat in silence for a long moment, contemplating the vast timescale of the challenge facing our combined civilizations. The Arbiter had been testing species for millions of years. It operated on a cosmic schedule that made our lives seem insignificant by comparison. And yet, in our brief moment on this galactic stage, we had done something remarkable. We had changed the rules of the game. We had shown that cooperation was possible even between species evolved to compete. I returned to my memoirs with renewed purpose, adding a final entry for the classified version that would be preserved in the deepest vaults of all three homeworlds. To those who will face the next test, remember that our greatest strength was never in our weapons or our technology or our individual biological advantages. It was in our willingness to stand together despite our differences. The humans taught us this lesson, that true power comes not from dominating others but from lifting them up alongside ourselves. This is why we never fight the humans. Not because we fear them, though there is much in their nature that warrants healthy respect. We never fight them because in doing so, we would be fighting against our own best future. A future where differences in biology and evolution are recognized not as threats but as strengths to be combined. The Arbiter will return. The test will resume. But if you remember nothing else from our experience, remember this. United, we passed a test designed to make us fail. United, we can face whatever comes next. And if you find yourself standing at the edge of conflict, wondering whether to extend a hand or raise a weapon, look to the lessons of our time. Choose cooperation. Choose unity. The survival of all our peoples depends on it. I sealed the record with my personal encryption key, knowing it would be opened and read by others like me in the distant future, guardians of a hard-won peace that must be preserved at all costs. As I gazed out at the setting sun of Viridian Prime, I thought about the ancient being watching us from somewhere in the darkness between stars. Let it watch. Let it see what becomes of species who choose to stand together rather than fall apart. The true test, I realized, was never really about surviving the swarm. It was about what we would become after facing extinction together, whether we would retreat back into our separate corners of the galaxy or forge something new and unprecedented. Looking at the thriving worlds around us, at the integrated colonies and defense forces and research teams, I knew which path we had chosen. And for the first time since learning of the Arbiter's existence, I felt not fear of the future but hope. Whatever was coming in 8,000 years, our descendants would face it together. And that would make all the difference.